Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on his trip to Ukraine. His first visit of a Prime Minister of Bharat in 45 years to Poland. But more importantly, PM Narendra Modi becomes the only person, perhaps global leader, who's gone to Moscow and is also in Kiev. It's very important, ladies and gentlemen, significant from a geopolitical perspective. There is lots that's happening even around the neighborhood too, with Muizu in Maldives having a softer approach towards Bharat, a change in stance. The Malaysia's Anwar Ibrahim coming and calling in on the Prime Minister and MOUs being signed. There is a lot that's also brewing. Given Mohammad Yunus's conversation and participation also in the Global South Conference and his presence there, despite what's happened in Bangladesh, and that Sheikh Hasina continues to seek temporary refuge in Bharat. What is Bharat's bhumika as far as role as far as geopolitics is concerned, and how critical is this Poland-Ukraine visit from various aspects? So we'll break down over the course of the next 20-25 minutes with our experts and try and get the right perspective on these matters. And they are, of course, past masters in this field of strategic affairs, defense analysts, and of course, foreign policy and diplomacy. Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former secretary at the MEA, is with us. We have Major General Sanjay Meston, who is former defense attaché and a defense analyst now, and Professor Brahma Chalani, strategic affairs expert. Namaste and Jai Hind to everybody. Thank you very, very much. Kanwal Sibalji, I would like to start with you and your thoughts on this Poland-Ukraine visit. Is it going to be a big win for Bharat? Are we trying and broker peace here, or is the agenda totally different from what is perceived or made out to be?
I don't think that this is a visit which will bring us a lot of diplomatic kudos at the international level, frankly, because both Poland and Ukraine at the moment are Poland and Ukraine are very deeply involved in the conflict with Russia. There is nothing much that India can do to resolve the conflict, frankly, because the key player is the United States of America, as also some countries in the European Union, where the mood against Russia has become much more negative than was the case in the past, with even a country like France and President Macron being surprisingly very aggressive towards Russia. Now, India, of course, has goodwill. And the fact that India has taken the decision to visit Poland and Ukraine, of course, sends a message that India is determined to keep its strategic autonomy, that it is playing the role to the extent that it can play that effectively as a peacemaker to promote dialogue and diplomacy in the current conflict, which is costing the rest of the world, especially the developing South, enormously, economically, and otherwise, because the whole geopolitical situation has got derailed significantly. It also is an effort to balance our foreign policy. Our Prime Minister visited Russia. There was a big blowback in the United States in particular, because this had happened at a time when, to my mind, Ukraine might have organized this bombing of the so-called hospital. We've seen that happening in Kashmir. Whenever there has been a visit from abroad, there has been an incident in order to highlight the issues involved there. So he's gone at a time, and of course, very important, Ukraine has escalated the conflict, if I can use that word, by, for the first time after the Second World War, physically invading Russian territory, going into Russia. This is a huge escalation, which will have enormous consequences for the future. So therefore, Ukraine has not done anything much to create a conducive atmosphere for our Prime Minister's visit. The Prime Minister has, as you know, tweeted to say that we will also share in perspectives on the peaceful resolution of the ongoing Ukraine conflict.
Yeah.
That intrigues me, because when you are going to share um, perspectives, which means that you have certain broad ideas in mind of how this can be resolved. I'll conclude by saying that this is part of our balancing of our foreign policy, and to that extent it sends a message. But to expect that we will be able to play any significant role in the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, to my mind, is a bit bit exaggerated.
Not perhaps getting down to the nuts and bolts of it, but if PM Narendra Modi is able to embrace and give such a big bear hug to Volodymyr Zelensky, then he would be perhaps the only global leader who can hug Vladimir Putin in Moscow and Zelensky in Kiev. And Zelensky is somebody who took exception to that hug on that day that you said what happened there in Russia. But can India keep a neutral perspective? Can India share and PM Modi share a vision forward for both nations and both leaders to eschew? And somewhere Zelensky will be taking this back to the powers that be, that is within NATO and more importantly America. Professor Chelani?
Anand, I agree entirely with what Ambassador Sybil has said. The road to peace in Ukraine lies through Washington. And Washington has been pressing Modi to engage with Ukraine. The problem is this: the timing of the visit couldn't be worse. Not only has there been a Ukrainian incursion of Russian territory, but in the last 24 hours, there's also been a Ukrainian drone attack on Moscow. So this has completely dashed hopes of any ceasefire. And then, right in India's neighborhood, the regime change in Bangladesh represents the biggest regional setback India has faced in more than a decade. Now, India's landlocked northeast is today surrounded by hostile forces on all sides. The very future of the northeast today is at stake. And the irony of ironies is this: that Modi is seeking to potentially play a role in the Ukraine conflict as a go-between, when India remains locked in a military standoff with China that has brought war clouds over the Himalayas. So my concern is about the timing, and in the past, Modi has made some ill-timed visits, foreign visits that have backfired on India's interests. Now, to give you two examples, one was the Lahore visit in late 2015. It really backfired on India because it led the Pakistani military establishment to carry out a series of attacks on Indian military bases. And the freeze in diplomatic relations between India and Pakistan is a consequence of that cycle. And another example of an ill-timed visit was the visit to Wuhan, before Wuhan became infamous for exporting the COVID-19 virus to the rest of the world. And this 2018 Wuhan visit came right after China's capture of the Doklam Plateau. And that visit gave rise to the self-deluding hype in India about the new quote-unquote Wuhan spirit. And this Wuhan spirit nonsense led to Indian complacency, providing China the opening to eventually make stealth encroachments on key borderlands of Ladakh. To be sure, Modi's Ukraine visit is unlikely to backfire on India. But the question is, why go to Ukraine at this juncture when there is absolutely no hope of any ceasefire effort making headway? And a bear hug of Zelensky may be a good photo op, but beyond a photo op, what does this visit provide?
See, timing sometimes, how do we choose this timing, Major General Heston? How do we actually choose timing? You have planned a visit is planned well in advance, and something happens in 24, 48 hours or soon after your visit. How do you know? PM Modi did not know that a Ukrainian hospital will be bombed when he's arrived in Moscow, so he had to handle that. He did talk about it in front of Vladimir Putin, where he said that it hurts when innocent children die. You have to walk a diplomatic tightrope, but strategically, what is Bharat trying to do here?
Yeah, I think the point highlighted about the timing is relevant. But what is Bharat trying to achieve here? I think I'll address both the issues. Firstly, coming on to the timing aspect. See, if we have to today be a global lead player, and so-called what we have the Viksit 2047 Bharat vision, we have to take certain leads in certain things. Sometimes we may be right, and certain times we may be wrong. And I think bold decisions have to be taken, and this perhaps has a bold decision, as Ambassador Sibbal also highlighted, that we are retaining the strategic autonomy, and we are the only nation today. We can talk to every nation in the world, which gives a great leverage and advantage. That is the biggest advantage. So therefore, keeping that stature in mind, we have a global stature, and we have a responsibility to go ahead for global peace. Yes, Ambassador Sibbal has very rightly pointed out that it will take time. I must remind that even for the Korean crisis, that India had played a very lead role for the armistice agreement. And mind you, it took 18 months of negotiations at the international level, in which India was also one of the lead players. And thereafter, we know that we even had a Indian custodian force deployed. And till date, I can state with great confidence the kind of diplomacy and defense diplomacy we have. Some of the South Koreans and even the North Koreans, we had, the prisoners exchange, etc. Some of them had even come to India. And till date, the South Korean embassy gets all the officers who are involved there. Now, most of them are no more, but their children, including grandchildren, they get them every year, and they recognize the participation by the Indian Army. So this is what long-term advantages have been. So timings, yes, it's a bit of a factor point to be debated, but nevertheless, I think it's an initiative.
But here's the question, General Heston, and let's start with you this time around. If we have not been able to protect our own borders, get our own neighbors on board to defining these borders, and we cannot protect our own coastline, we cannot thwart an America's intention with the Saint Martin Islands, we cannot stop a Chinese meddling in the Maldives halfway across, far, far away from where they are supposed to be. How is it that we'll be taken seriously, or the meddling of the US and China in Pakistan or in Sri Lanka? We've not been able to establish a hold in this region itself, around the subcontinent, despite us being such a large country and our presence here. How is it that we will be taken seriously when we try and get into something like Russia versus Ukraine?
Absolutely, Anand, you have stated a very correct point, but let me highlight internal challenges for India will always remain and have always been there. It's nothing new. We have had problems with all these countries. In 67, Nathula was again attacked. The Chinese had fired, and of course I commanded the same brigade, so I'd gone into the history. So what I'm trying to say, we have had quite unstable neighbors, but that the armed forces will handle. And
but can we do that? See, point is, Ambassador Sibbal, do we as a nation, will we be taken seriously when we demand our place at the high table? We are making the projections, we are making the right noises, we have certain advantages to leverage. But are we in a position of strength in our own region? Would you want to take a positive that Anwar Ibrahim from Malaysia has come, MOUs have been signed there, Muizu has softened his stance, his whole campaign was India out, now he wants India back in Maldives?
Well, these are ups and downs in diplomacy. One has to look at the long-term trends, and the long-term trends are definitely in India's favor. I mean, if you look around the world, how many countries really count on the global stage? India is certainly amongst them. Yet we define ourselves as a middle power because of the fact that our economy has not yet reached the heights that China has reached. But if you look at the whole of Asia, which is the country which is the biggest player in Asia today, and potentially leaving aside China. Japan is not. Japan is just tied to the United States of America. The security is totally tied. Small population, declining demographics. You look in the Middle East, there is no country which can match with India. So therefore, we will have our role on the global stage increasingly, and countries will recognize our existing and future potential, and engage us and profit from our economic rise, as we will profit in cooperation with them, especially the United States and Europe, which are the source of technology for us. I mean, there is no other source of high technology than these two countries. China potentially, since he is advancing in technology, could be a partner, but obviously this is out of the question. So therefore, I have no doubt that on the global stage, our worth, our value, and our profile will be increasingly recognized. But back to the question that you haven't asked me, but I'd like to say a few things about the Ukraine and Poland. You know, currently Poland is the most is the closest to the United States of America in terms of the US's Russia policy. The Polish president is deeply, viscerally anti-Russian. So is their foreign minister. Now, this may have nothing to do with us, but the point is, if you are looking at the geopolitics of it, then there's not much we can extract from Poland at the geopolitical level, though at the bilateral level, yes, there's a long-standing relationship. Culturally, we are very close. We have no bilateral differences with Poland. There are prospects of developing trade. Already it's about $6 billion. We have invested over $1 billion in Poland. There are areas, IT, pharmaceuticals, and all we can build on. With Ukraine, even that is not there, because at the moment it is in a conflict. It is totally surviving on the basis of those that is received in the States and Europe. And therefore, and then in an unstable situation, what is it that you can do on the ground in terms of developing economic ties? Though on the defense side in the past, we've had good relationship, but I don't think there's much prospect for the time being. If there is doubts about the impact of the war on Russia's defense cooperation with us, so you can imagine that there's not any prospect of any defense cooperation with Ukraine. And in terms of resolving this conflict and peaceful and perspectives for peace and this and that, frankly, what we may have in mind is that China has played a role. They had a special representative for peace in Ukraine, and Russia went along with this. Turkey has played a role. South Africa has played a role. The Saudi Arabia or somebody else, I think, has played a role. And therefore, we also want to fly a flag and saying that we should also play a role, especially since we want to be the voice of the global South. So it is actually wanting to increase our profile and not leave the entire field free to China and others. And other members of BRICS. Brazil has played a role to promote peace, but I think we should be realistic. There's nothing much we can do. And finally, there's one point we should keep in mind. You know, Pakistan has been trying to invite President Putin to Pakistan, and we've always been very concerned at that prospect because it might entail. Now, if Russia, as a balancing strategy, if Putin decided to go to Pakistan, you can imagine the consternation in India. Therefore, we have to be very watchful of what we, in terms of our relationship with Ukraine in particular, at this time when they are locked in this conflict with Russia and actually are fighting a proxy war.
Is it so difficult for us to manage that, Professor Brahmachalani, when a Pakistan, as a failed state, has been able to milk off the US dollars while feed off the Chinese arsenal and their own interests on either side and played its own geopolitical positioning to its own advantage and played multiple nations like that? We are a far more dependable and able ally. So why should nations have a problem with that? Or have we not leveraged it ably enough?
Well, there's two things, Anand. First is that India's international profile and geopolitical weight are growing, and India's ambition to be a global player is becoming more and more apparent. But this in turn has led to efforts to box India in, to weigh India down on the subcontinent. And Bangladesh is the latest wake-up call for India. We need to wake up to the kind of pressures that are being brought to bear on India. We should not think otherwise, and we should recognize that what's happened in Bangladesh has a major bearing on India's long-term security. For at least one generation now, we have lost Bangladesh, and Bangladesh will not just be a nuisance, but a threat to India's vital interests, including a major threat to India's northeast. Having said that, we should also keep in mind one other thing, that going to Ukraine, a number of world leaders have been to Ukraine in the last 2 years after the Russian invasion of Ukraine began. But look where these world leaders are. Most of them, I'm not talking of all of them, most of them either have lost power or they are on their way out, like Biden and Kishida being the latest example, or their approval ratings at home have plummeted dramatically, like the German Chancellor Scholz or the French President Macron. So going to Kyiv and having a photo op isn't such a bright thing for world leaders. And I think that we have to see the wider perspective. The region in which India is located is increasingly in turmoil.
Right.
And while we need to play a global role, we need to temper our ambitions and focus more on our region, because they are hostile forces working to contain India.
No, fair point. We are going to be contained. There will be others who will want to box us in, but that's geopolitics. Are we going to still push our way through and try and geek out successes where many expect us to fail? That's the larger question. Major General Heston, final word?
Final word is, I think whatever initiative we are taking, it is in the right direction, because I stated earlier also, we are the only country we can talk to every country. Today we have got good relations with America, with West, with everyone, whether it is Russia. And I think to make some beginning, there is no harm, and whatever it's happened to other world leaders perhaps may not be applicable in the Indian context, because India is not very closely associated with Ukraine or Russia, the common man. Our concerns are very, very different, as rightly pointed out, in the immediate neighborhood. So it's really not going to make a major effect on the elections whenever they happen in India. And I think we should go ahead and make some attempts. That is what I would like to say, Anand.
Any successes? Yes. Bilaterally, what is it that we can eke out? Ukraine was supplying us a lot of fertilizer, and also there were other imports that were coming in from Ukraine. It is considered to be the breadbasket to the world. Russia has continued to say that we'll provide you additional fertilizer and also more fuel for the Kudankulam project. But is there more to it? Are there other layers which perhaps we can as a nation milk while we try and balance and walk this tightrope of strategic autonomy? Gentlemen, thank you very much for a very candid and a very varied perspective, in-depth perspective on what to make out of this visit of the Prime Minister, the engagement both in Poland, in Warsaw, and also in Kiev, in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you so much. Namaste.